Ladies and gentlemen, Dale here. This is Nerd in the Huddle. Hope you're all doing well. I just want to go over a few things, starting straight into the thick of it. There's allegations about FIFA that they are corrupt, and for me, at least, there's definitely reason to be suspicious. There's definitely a fair shout if you look at how politic with the politics getting involved and the money involved in football. So everyone's right to have their suspicions. The questions I have now, because I do feel it opens a lot, is, well, if FIFA is corrupt, I definitely feel, because I've always felt, not always, I should say, especially in recent years, I've felt I've felt like the Ballon d'Or was a little rigged, and people will say like, "Oh my God, is a Ronaldo fan. He doesn't want Messi getting Ballon d'Ors." But if the World Cup is rigged, if FIFA is rigged, why can't the Ballon d'Or not be rigged? Let's 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 be honest. Let's look at it. The thing I've always had, which irked me, is I think it happens a lot. Maybe not every season, but it's definitely happened a lot. Is how a player can be the best player all year, but then a player has a good World Cup or an international tournament, and all of a sudden they win the Ballon d'Or. I've always thought about this: a player that has been fantastic this season who won't even get a shout, and he's possibly been the best player all season, because I always feel like the Ballon d'Or is the talk of the town. The talk of the town. So right now, probably the talk of the town is maybe Haaland or Messi, maybe Mbappe. First off, let's look at those players, those three players who are going to be in the Ballon d'Or contendership. First off, let's look at Messi. All this season, let's look at Messi. First off, he's been playing all season in a minnow league in America. He hasn't even been playing in Europe. It is it. So all season, to be perfectly honest, like Cristiano Ronaldo playing in Saudi Arabia, you know, they have been playing in a league that, like, countries like Turkey, if you're playing for Galatasaray, they haven't been a top league ever, maybe. But it's a farmers league. It's a farmers league, as they call it. It's a retirement league, I call it. So No, like he hasn't been playing in one of the top leagues, so I don't feel like that should be considered. Second, Haaland. He's done okay this season for Man City. He's done okay, but overall, he hasn't had one of his best seasons, and I feel there have been better players this season. But he's had a good World Cup, so he'll be considered. Mbappe, Real Madrid. To be perfectly honest, have been poor this season. The the cha- their Champions League run was really poor, and but he'll be considered because he's had a good World Cup. That's why he'll be considered. Players who should be considered but are not, because this one player in particular, who I feel should be in the running but won't be because their national team unfortunately was not in the World Cup, and just because he plays for a team that is probably lower down in the World Cup rankings, Kashvelia. Why is he not being talked about? It's just because he was his national team wasn't in the World Cup and he wasn't able to play in the World Cup. But for me, he's possibly been the best all over the whole season. He's probably been the best for me. I think he's had an absolutely amazing season, but he won't be considered. But strangely, he still have a better chance than defenders. Defenders, goalkeeper, defensive midfielders, which is another thing I want to talk about. Why is why are defenders not being talked about? Why is Marquinhos not being talked about? You know, I think it's been absolutely over the years, defenders, goalkeepers, and defensive midfielders have been overlooked as well. If I'm not mistaken, one goalkeeper, one goalkeeper has won the Ballon d'Or, which would be Lev Yashin. One defender, which would be Cannavaro, and one defensive midfielder, Rodri. You could possibly count Modric as as, as well, but I consider him a centre mid, even though in the older as he got older, he played more defensive role. I so with that, if you look at you know defenders slash midfield defensive with defensive players, including goalkeepers, not being considered, and players, maybe players who haven't played well in the world in an international tournament, but went on to, like, you look at it. Why isn't Salah won? Why hasn't Salah won the Ballon d'Or when he scored 40 in a season? Why hasn't Haaland? And I'm not talking about this season. Why hasn't Haaland, when he scored 40 goals in one season, not being considered won a Ballon d'Or? It's. I definitely feel like players, those attackers, you know, 40 goals in a season. That's just incredible. But then, if you're looking at defenders over the years, how come Maldini hasn't won one? You got. You look at all the great defenders. Franz Beckenbauer. Hang on, did Franz Beckenbauer win one? Uh, oh, three. That's my mistake. Three defenders, but four times. Franz Beckenbauer won it twice, and Sama won it once. Cannavaro, six. So there's three defenders. And then you got. So. Come on. Can't stand the winning. So yeah, only Rodri defensive midfielder. So four defenders. Well, three defenders. One has won it twice. One goalkeeper. And one defensive midfielder. So yeah. So 1, 2, 3, 4. So I haven't counted it, but the Ballon d'Or started in 1958. So 1956. So it started in 1956. 44 add 26, 44, 60. So 70 years. And so defensive midfielders, the Ballon d'Or has only been won, like I said, including a goalkeeper, 5 times. And if I've mathed correctly, 70 years. I mean, why have players, why have goalkeepers like Neuer, why is Casillas, why is Buffon, why is players like that being so overlooked? You know, why? Casemiro, this time at Real Madrid, you know, attackers will always get benefit of the doubt. So I don't like when people say, "Oh, the goat is this player." Reason being is because people will always say when deciding the GOAT is an attacker, but no one actually considers all the players. They don't consider defenders, they don't consider goalkeepers, they don't consider defensive midfielders. So why do we do that? It's an 11-man game. It is an 11-man game. So when considering I'm not saying the best player in the world is not an attacker. It could be an attacker. But we don't consider them. We don't consider defensive players. Why? Why? Um, Bad players like Van der Sar go through. That's another goalkeeper who's absolutely fantastic. But we don't. We don't. Even the ones who have won a Ballon d'Or, like Lev Yashin and Franz Beckenbauer, why aren't they considered as the greatest player of all time? Why do we always go for the attacker? Like I said, one of the first ones I said was Salah, Haaland. You know, in terms of scoring 40 goals in a season, I'm not saying I'm not saying that all the players who have won a Ballon d'Or haven't deserved it. They may well have deserved it. You know, but just consider them. I always liked being a goalkeeper. Consider defenders. Consider defensive midfielders. Consider goalkeepers when deciding the Ballon d'Or. And think of that, like 56. So, it was 70, wasn't it? Let me just. No, it wasn't. So, 56. Yeah, 70 years. So maybe consider defensive players from now on as well as the attackers. And then where was Lewandowski's Ballon d'Or? He's had some very, very good seasons. Really, very, very good seasons. Sergio Ramos, Pepe, maybe. I think Bonucci. possibly. There's been some absolute greats over the years, but they don't get considered for me. They don't get considered, and they probably won't. Just, have a think about that. You know, why are we always considering the attackers, and not the defenders, and not the goalkeepers and midfielders? One goalkeeper. One goalkeeper. Think of the goalkeepers we've had over the years come through football. Players from, like I said, Buffon, Neuer, and then you had Shilton. You've had Edwin van der Sar. You've had all sorts of defenders. Then, like I said, you've had Maldini. You've had Sergio Ramos. You've had Carlos Puyol. You've had Piqué. You've had some Rio Ferdinand. You've had some really, really good defenders over the years. And then you've got left backs like Roberto Carlos. It's just. Then, yeah. Dani Alves, Patrice Evra. But defenders, they just they just don't get considered. Let's leave it at that. I've had my opinion on the Ballon d'Or. I don't really like the Ballon d'Or. I think it is. I think there's been players who maybe have not 100% deserved it in the past. Some of them, most of them, maybe yeah, but players, defensive players, they just don't get considered. Well, after that, I think I'll leave you guys to it. Have a fantastic rest of the day. I'm gonna go to the air show now in Swansea, so I'm looking forward to that. Let's go do it. All the best. Nerd in the Heddle. Subscribe, like, comment. Question I have for you. Do you agree with me? Do you think the Ballon d'Or, do you think defensive players, let's change it to defensive players, do you think defensive players get overlooked when it comes to the Ballon d'Or? Do you think there's been players in that are being overlooked when it's come to the Ballon d'Or? Have your thoughts, put your comments in. All the best.